Okay, Randy Green here. Let's continue our little sequence. I'm weaving information around the missions so you understand the missions and why they technically failed. Because first and foremost, you have to remember the progressive councils were disinformed. The settlers here and the lineages and the brotherhoods, whatever you want to call them, they're intrasystemics, as I call them, because the intra means in our system, in between our system, within our system. Whereas inter is between two systems, intra is within one system. The intrasystemics, they were feeding off the councils with false information. Plus, they had made this whole arrangement of the second seeding after the timeline event under the Mediterranean races that, and we're talking about 15, 20,000 years ago or something, they said that they had agreed to this type of lower level type of vessel because our reality was solidifying. But what they didn't tell the councils was that they did solidify that reality with different types of technologies because they had got new allied. And these new allied were some of the ones that later on were collaborating with the archons and these kind of things, but they kind of came in the back door. But that's another story. We won't go into that one. What is important to understand is that the lineages told they had the right hand going on, la 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 la, and then they had something going on the left hand down here. The right hand were to the councils, preaching to the choir and telling them a lot of lies, and the councils, because they were not familiar with the concept of lying, because all races have rules and they have laws, and we follow that one to the dot, all depending on what system we're in. If we are into another system under another race, we follow the laws of that system, and we educate ourselves before we enter that system so we understand the laws of that system, so we won't transgress, so we won't get on the regression spiral, because that's kind of the downward spiral where you go backwards in your evolution and where you have to do things all over again because you screw up and you haven't learned the lesson. So you will learn by doing it again, not as a punishment, but as a do-over. Quite simple. It's all about knowledge. So if you didn't learn it the first time around, well, you'll just have to do it another time around, and then be more observant and learn by your mistakes, because you'll remember what stupid things you did. And there would be a lot of supporting technology to show you where you went wrong the first time. So there is no such thing as punishment in the benevolent systems. There is knowledge, obtaining of knowledge, using that knowledge to develop capacities, and these capacities are used to transform energy. Okay, so the teachers are all about interracial behavior, and the more scientific oriented ones are all about developing of energy and technology in ways that are supporting the behavior between races so they can progress as unity within all of the cycles, because we're all interconnected, for the highest good of the many, for the highest progression rate, the highest standards, and the highest purity rate. So all technologies that are built for the purpose of progression. If they don't support progression for the organic life forms, then that technology is deemed failed. It has no purpose, because the purpose is progression, it's evolution. It's transforming energy to its highest potential so consciousness can descend from the higher versions of ourselves in the cycles that kind of have a potential field of unused consciousness genetics that goes on different levels of dimensions, so that you begin to understand there are versions of yourself that are developed within dimensions, and there are versions of yourself that are non-developed, which you can then pull in by working with energy. So it's all about expanding and becoming more. Technically, it's not correct, but let us just play with that illusion that you can go from a human form to become a sun, because you can gather genetics and energies and consciousness and undergo transmutation processes where you use your consciousness to such a degree that your expansion sphere is on the same size as the sun, and you transmute energy to the same degree as a sun within that vessel you could call a sun. It is technically incorrect because the sun is not an intelligent entity as you would understand it, but it holds a level of intelligence which you can communicate with. But this is technically a type of interactive simulation program, which goes with your type of genetics and what you can do with the sun, which is an energy life form that does hold life codes and therefore is a sort of sentient life, but it does not have a personality as you would understand it, but it does reflect and interact with the life forms that are looking at it and are part of developing its different types of life codes, because that goes with the rays that are under that sun will need the codes of the sun to change as the organic forms and the life forms beneath the sun are changing their dimensional setting and their code systems. The sun would have to develop as well, and that is going through what's called a feedback loop system between the organic forms and the ones the sun that is fueling these organic forms to progress further through different sequences of life force or life force energy, call it whatever you want to call it. Technically, life force is not energy. It's a specific type of code system that turns the combination of consciousness and energy into a life force, which is what you could call a flame code, which is similar to the kinetic process. It transmutes and by that allows both energy and consciousness to elevate into higher versions of itself. So with the line that were told to the councils, what they told the councils were seeing things were not going as they're supposed to go here, and the timeline event, they knew that had to end. They knew the cycles were up, and they knew the timeline event would end with the age of Pisces, because that zodiac kind of circulation, which is a huge cycle, were to end, and with that the timeline event as well, because the energies were wearing out, and it was seeded in a specific cycle, and it had run its course. The seedings had come afterwards. These civilizations were running out of energy. The system itself was running out of energy, and hence the system was beginning to do its rebooting initiated processes, which comes whenever a construction reaches a specific level of low energy. And our solar system is definitely on the brink, long overdue for that resetting, and that is part of the re-looping and whatever the races that are controlling our reality has done with humanity and pushing us into a parallel reality. Now we're being pushed back, shifting us in the galactic arm, and all the stuff they have been doing has been done to prevent our solar system from rebooting. Because otherwise it would have done it a long, long time ago. It would have done it when we shifted into the Mediterranean type of vessel, because that was too solidified. It was in density 1, and none of the original constructions run with that type of energy. But a lot of programs were inserted to make that happen. And as we speak, these are being cleared out as well. Good. So we had the last mission we kind of know of. I will still say to this day that the time of the Buddha and the time of the Christ mission, this is called the Christ missions, the humble ones that came in that under the great teachers. And again, that teacher was technically not just a will love, he was also a warrior, because he was trained as a warrior on Mars, by the way, and in that had a different capacity than the one that's been portrayed. So my version of Joshua, not Yeshua as many translated into, but Joshua, which is how I see his name, because he's similar to the same figure that technically goes back to some of the priestly lineages of the ones that did the actual exodus from Egypt. But that's let's just shelve that one, because that's not, we don't need to put that one in here. But as I said, Mars and Egypt are highly interconnected, same as Nibiru and the Sumerian realities are highly connected. Okay. So the missions that were done there, the councils knew that they were sending this mission in a hostile environment. And let me just be totally frank. The memories I have of it are sporadic. And I was not part of the mission. I was part of a different mission that happened at the same time. So what I have of memories of that is a conversation with Joshua, knowing of Joshua from Mars, knowing him from other missions in other systems, similar issue under the timeline event and the transition process out of the timeline event and what needed to happen there. That was kind of my skill set with the whole technological part of what needed to be done. So a mission was always a kind of a combination of different skill sets that were needed to go in and assist civilizations to do the transition. And you can then figure out if you say, okay, would Joshua the only one and his team, were they the only ones that came in at that time to give the lessons for the rest of humanity? No, you had in Mesopotamia as well. And you had in India, the Indus Valley, you had the Buddha, all depending on the factions and the different races and who wanted to allow this information to be given. And you can say again, well, was Joshua and his mission, were they only centered in Jerusalem and in Israel, or were they actually also around in other countries? Were they traveling around in other jurisdictions? And how did the reality actually look at the time, and onward and so forth? So this, again, I can't answer these questions because I can't remember it fully. And I only, as I said, I only got fragments of it. I got 2 pieces of information where I am, one, I'm seeing Joshua teaching alongside with Miriam. And I'm very, very fascinated of his heart field because he is spreading energy. Man, he's spreading energy. But she was holding another level of knowledge that was supposed to go with the Pleiadians, and her function I was not really on top of because she was from a different lineage under the what I would call the Niburian Pleiadians. And whatever she was doing, for me, she was just a traitor because she sold off that mission. For me, she's the sole reason why that mission failed. There was a lot of other stuff going on, but she was the nail in the coffin. So that is what I kind of have. And then I have a conversation with Joshua before we entered into the mission. And then I have a conversation with him after when things began to go wrong and a transfer of information and some of the things he knew that he was supposed to do within that mission. And some of that information I've been carrying on with that one as long as the other ones he were talking with as well, giving pieces of information they needed so that if he was not there, they could in somewhere and somehow try to complete the mission. But from where I'm standing, these memories could just as well be implanted. So it doesn't matter. But what matters is the basic concept of the different types of missions that have been given and why they were given in that way. And for me and where I'm standing, the goal of the mission 2,500 years ago are similar to the goal we have today. Because at that time, it was given so that people could prepare, so that the factions could prepare, so that everybody could prepare, whoever was within the human projects. And the same thing where that was taken away, that was twisted and thwarted, and Joshua was killed. And his body was sold off to the Orions and all of these kind of things. So, and with that actually being he was being moved by Miriam to Egypt along with a group of the ones that were part of the Christ missions going into Egypt and then being enslaved, literally taken over by the Orions. And that is for me why most of the ones that are within were part of that project and on these missions that have been reborn today are now born under enslavement contracts, holding a cobra, or have been chopped up and put part into what we call the military project templates, where they have an overlay template which is covering up and clogging and distorting the original genetics, but they are not in full form. They were chopped up. So they've been divided amongst a lot of humans, so they would never really be what they were for that mission. Each and one of them were engineered a specific way. So you can't say this will ignite it or this will ignite it. And some of the military projects, their genetics are so shitty that whatever is behind that can never ever activate because it simply cannot work because the low amount of genetics cannot breach through the overlay genetics of the military project. And then it's put into an incarceration vessel, which means it's under enslavement contract, which means it's controlled by the Orions and the Dracos and the really harsh races. I talk a little bit about these kind of things in Understanding the Old Stellar Source in that book, where I literally lift the veil a little bit for some of the extreme measurements that were done to the ones that could be seen as freedom fighters. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm standing, why that failed. But going up a little bit higher, because when we talk about this, you should have got the understanding. There's always something behind something. There's always behind that something that's another level, and behind that level there's another level, because we got cycles, we got dimensions, we got densities, we got universes, and expands outwards and outwards and outwards. And it's about finding the root of things to be able to dissolve everything else that are the effect of that root. And the root is not always within our system, but technically somewhere else. And sometimes total parallel universes and different cycles. So it goes far, far back. But what went wrong there was the Syrian councils that were behind the Joshua mission. They were already, they were infected. There were, I remember meeting there, I was part of that, one of the meetings there where these things were discussed. And I could see that some of the members there had Orion genetics that had been inverted. And since the Syrian Council, again, this whole, why didn't they see it? Why didn't the others see it? Again, these are just glimpses of memories, but these are important pieces of the puzzle for me to remember when I came in, with the understanding that even though the Syrians within our system always have presented themselves as the White Brotherhood and the Ascended Masters and the ones that knew things, I carried a memory that quite a lot of them were infected. They were fighting their infection the best way they could, and some of their suffering teachings and how they were trying to transmute that infection is an evidence of their attempt to transmute what they had within them. It doesn't make them worse beings. It just means that they weren't what they sold off to be. And for me, it's one of the things that's very important for me is I don't accept falsehood or lies. If they at the council meeting had said, this is how we perceive it, but technically 2% of our genetic composition in our template is infected, so we don't really know if it's the right manner to do, we will self-contain and we will pull ourselves out of the equation because we are not really capable of reading the timelines correct due to our infection. That would have been an honorable way to go around it, and they would have secluded themselves and worked with that infection until they were out of it and understood what it was and what it did to their mindset. But instead, they remained within the position. We had the same issues in the Pleiadian councils. And that led to the downfall of some of these decisions. They were based upon lies and races that did not come clean with their level of infection. And that led to some very, very unfortunate decisions. And that was one of the conversations I had with Joshua before he did his famous in the garden last gathering in the olive garden before his crucifixion. Anyways, that's, as we know from the earliest letters of Paul, it said, he never mentions that he was crucified. He says he was hanged on a tree, which is a little bit different than the version we have been given. And that's because the cross is an old symbol that goes back to Atlantis, and the crucifixion of Christ is showing that these, it's a kind of similar as when you have Inanna that is standing on top of a lion. That is her way of showing that she has got the lions, the remaining lion warriors under her foot, that she has slayed them in that one, and she is the war princess that has slayed the lion, and by that is the victorious. As so is the Christ on the cross is the way that these negative races and are showing off that they crucified nailed the true consciousness of the Syrians on that cross of Atlantis, by that having overtaken society by a blood sacrifice and death cult and whatever's going on with that type of religion. Just saying there are reasons for these symbols. Okay, so where am I going with this? They came in to, again, with the whole kind of transition period, then transition period now. Most of you who were part of that time period and these kind of the missions, those of you who have that remembering of that, some of this is in placed memories, some of these are false memories, some of them are actual memories, and you are to figure out what it is. Some of you might have, there's a period of time where there's a lot of people, a lot of females thinking they were actually in Maria Magdalena. And that is because Miriam, in spite of her arrangement with the Orions, part of her was chopped up and part of her were turned into something utterly, completely different, very nasty, pushed into the underworld, the yada yada, dual version, whatever. And the rest of her were chopped up and divided into, again, different type of humans in an incarceration vessel where it couldn't ignite, but could still be used as if her energy was still present. And in that feminine energy was still part of what Lisa Renee is referring to as the Sophia teachings, the Sophia teachings, the teachings of wisdom, which is in the Hebrew Bible is called Sophia. And that's a Greek word. It's actually called the Shekinah in the Hebrew Bible. Okay. Where we're standing now, and from my perspective, it is not enough just to talk about the principles and the rules. It does administer the heart field, it does administer the type of vibration you have, and it does connect you to the vibration of the sun as it shifts into density 2. And it does alter your emotional field if you're willing and ready to let go of your human emotions by working your way through them, releasing the energy patterns and the parasites that are there, and all of the different types of prohibiting technologies that are connected to your emotional field, and by that clogging the heart field and preventing it from turning itself into the vibrational field. That is part of the basic energy work, how to release the energy patterns, how to get rid of the parasites, and why that is important. So that's the only thing I can share with the will, wisdom, love kind of teacher system. And whenever I used to in my missions, I was always the one that were going with the technological part, and then I would have a team around me, of which one would always be the kind of wisdom teacher or the love, will kind of type, and that's, as I said, from where I actually knew Joshua. And in that way, he would, for instance, let's make up a mission, because I can't remember it, but I know I've been on missions with him. And let's make up one where we enter into a system to tell a civilization about the higher levels of the principles and how they were to be used. And he would tell about this, and he would show it in energy. He would vibrate his heart field out, and he would literally bathe people in that higher type of energy that the principles, when they work correctly with the vibrational field, can produce, which is actually the correct use of power and the correct use of energy, from where you can transmute energies so that higher levels of consciousness can descend into your organic form. So in that, he would show that and tell that and all that love and light and good stuff, and people would get in awe and being totally transmuted and softened and mellowed and humbled, and wow, the wow factor. And at the same time, I would do something else more technically with the technical staff, correcting the programs and talking about the construction and the other stuff I would do while Joshua would be out wowing people. I would be doing something else, and other people of the same mission, because you don't go in just two people, you go in a group of people, would do whatever they needed to do to get these societies back on track and progressing according to plan and what they were supposed to do. It's a made-up story, but it's not far from the truth. So with this, I made my own decisions, I made my own choices, and we can always debate whether or not, I know for a fact that I'm not here in my full capacity. I also know I've been chopped up. I've been gathering my pieces. So yes, I know I've been chopped up. I know I have different versions of myself on the planet, which I am working to release the highest level, not harming the person, but the highest level, so I can get that, which is part of my original template. And I do know I am what is called the prime of that, which means I have the major portion of that original template I had when I came into the mission. That template was engineered for that mission. So that means that that vessel from where this organic form has been made is part of only a portion of me as a mission vessel, which is technically an organic vessel engineered for a mission or a purpose for a specific system, and 2%, only holding 2% of the original genetic composition. But this is as good as it gets, and we'll work with what we have got. And there's also the repulsion barrier factor that has separated our reality field in density 1 from the other densities, which means there are other versions of me outside the repulsion barrier I can't connect to because the repulsion barriers are, but I have portions of myself here, and I will work with the portions of myself, and you will do the same. It was a little bit easier in the Christ missions or the Joshua and Miriam missions because they, and I do plural here because I think they came in many times before it went wrong. I think it was not just one time coming in. I think they came in several times over a period of time, and the final one was where they were taken out. So what I'm saying here is that at that time, my best guess is that there weren't the same level of chopping up as we have now. So with this, when we're doing, again, with the whole kind of the story thing about the councils not having the full information, some of the things that has come out of me being pulled through all of these weird programs I've been part of, whether it is deliberately or as part of my mission, or I've been dragged in unwillingly, and the councils have found the remains of me as the different military project, Grace, whatever, done the hyperbolic upgrade of me, then I became visible and they could pull me in. I don't know these things. It doesn't matter. But what matters is that I have been pulled into some of the councils, and this goes with a holographic representation of my energy field. I'm still here, but portion of my energy field is scanned and replicated and then transferred into their system, hold in a sphere, because not as high vibrant as it should, so they put it in this sphere so it can be in the councils that are on a higher level, and then they read my genetics, they read my code system, they read everything to get what's actually going on here. And in that, it has come to my attention, which I also knew from my memories, that they have been disinformed. So when we're talking about why haven't any of these missions succeeded, they haven't because the ones that send in people did not have the full picture. And I know the last conversation I had with Joshua was about that. It was about that there were infected people in the Syrian councils, that disinformation had been given, that he was fearing for his life, that he could not trust Miriam, and he had given up his code mission codes put the other way, the codes for the mission of his energy system to several of the participants so that they could carry on if they would survive it, because he feared for all of us. He feared that the mission would fail, and he feared that it would lead to the devastation of the entire mission, and if we were not careful, it would lead to the devastation of the councils and all of the realities beyond, because he had the fear that we had been infiltrated, and by that would be used as access to the benevolent worlds beyond the repulsion barrier. And I think he was right. I have no shadow of doubt of that one. Okay. When he died, his body was transferred out via Egypt and some of the Orion gates, and his body has for sure been part of trying to recreate different vessels within the male population. As I said, Miriam's template was chopped up. Joshua's template was chopped up, but also his organic form has been used for reproducing different forms of male organic forms, which have been used extensively by the Orions to get access to the different gate systems. I need to drink. Alongside with high levels of darkened Atlantean code systems. So these males that carry the Christ gene, they would also hold a high level of Orion genetics, which makes them go into polarity setting between shining and darkening, amplifying and spreading infection, which was the main purpose of it, hence the crucifixion of Christ on the Atlantean cross. Okay, so that's a little bit darker level of the history. So the males that holds that combination, their clearing process is quite difficult. And to be honest, probably impossible. Anyways, okay. There will be a lot of, when we do the transitioning now, and when we try to do what we didn't do then, we are up against different challenges than we had at the time. First and foremost, we are now getting out of the 4 years in hell, completing the Orion cycle and all of that stupidity. And that's why I'm talking about these missions, because that was a cycle that was initiated, ending up at the military projects, the Adams and Eves, and the different tribes that were created as the military project under the Orions, using Hydra technology, AI technology, and Cobras, and a lot of very, very unfortunate stuff to keep these humans as gateways into our reality so the Orions could come in and take over. And they succeeded for 4 years, and then their cycle was up because the Orions are humanoids. They can't exist here, so they had to parasite on the humans. But to be able to parasite on the humans, they created versions that were either combined with Pleiadian genetics, original Lyran genetics, or white Orion genetics, or Syrian A genetics, or the remnants of the ones from the Christ missions. And other prior missions, by the way, because they can travel in time. But these genetics do not go well with the Orion genetics, so eventually the human vessel would begin to deteriorate, the energy system would begin to break down, and the Cobra would eventually take over, and in that darkening the human entirely. For the Orions, that was kind of a good thing because then they had a vessel. The downside was that their energy system and everything in that human would then be focused unawarely in the 8th dimension, which is a part of the antagonistic core. So technically, they had an organic vessel inside this one, and they could get part of the genetics to begin with, but they couldn't transmute anything. And eventually, the human energy system would succumb to the Cobra and the Dark Orion genetics, and then they would just have a Dark Orion pit inside that organic vessel in our reality of no use to them. So it was just a matter of time before they had absorbed all viable genetics and then invert the energy system, and then the Cobra would take over that human. And once that happened, there would be a natural sealing off of that energy system because the Orions are not allowed to be here. Never was. The white Orions were, but not the ones that got inverted, because our system is still, or used to be, too high vibrant. But that was the whole plot with the Atlantean councils and yada, yada, yada. Anyways, so that has completed, that has ended, that cycle has played out. And we can hope that the humans that most of them didn't know, they didn't know how dark they became because they couldn't see in the 8th dimension, and there was still their human version down here. But what they didn't know was that they were taking out humans around them. They were literally draining energy systems around them. They were put there to extinguish people around them that actually had a possibility to lighten up and ensure that we wouldn't go into the Orion cycle. And that is why they chopped off Joshua, and that's why they chopped up Miriam and put them into the organic vessels and the templates of the military project, so that these youth from the 70s, 80s, and mostly 70s and 80s, they would grow up. There are few of them in the 2000s, but not many. They would grow up and become a generation of extinguisher. They would take out all of the other souls that participate in the Christ missions, making sure that Christ would never ever be reborn, to put it that way, that the Christ consciousness would never ever prosper amongst humanity, so humanity would not be able to do the transition out of the Orion system, out of the negative alien agenda. That has hopefully ended now. And there has been worked a lot to make that undone, so that whoever's left of 1, the original Christ missions, 2, the second seedings, 3, the ones that are having viable genetics from their own systems but been part of enslavement contracts, and 4, whatever is part of whatever used to be of the military projects. Either these genetics will activate with the new grand cycle, release themselves from the organic form and the shitty templates, and they will pull out and return to the system where they came from and be recalibrated, which is the best scenario. And then the organic form will be neutralized, because with no viable genetics, the shitty genetics can't prosper. And in that, it will just become a human with an organic field, a mind field, and emotional field. And that human will just live its good natural life until it kind of cannot withstand the density 2 energies of the sun. Or it will go into the cycle of devastation with the rest of the density 1 solar system, where they will live their trajectory, give birth a couple of children, a couple of generations, and then later on in the future be part of them that returns to try and fix why their whole system is dead and what happened there. So that is kind of that trajectory for these humans. If the shitty genetics does not extinguish in these military projects, and they do foster kids, they have become and are the parents of some of the kids that we will see as a problem in the future, but we will deal with it in the future, not now, because now they're just kids, and kids, you can't deal with kids that have this type of genetics. They have to be grown up to understand that they need to do work on themselves to clear out the Hydra genetics, the technology they're linked up to, their original purpose, what the purpose of the parents actually were, and what they actually have become, and onward and so forth. And that's a more dark side of history. And there are groups here already, and there will come more groups in the future that will focus on these humans, because they can't just go into the cycle of devastation, because they technically hold immortal, darkened, inverted genetics from the Orion system. So they need to be dealt with. And how that is going to unfold, I don't know. It's not part of my trajectory. I have investigated them. I have mapped their genetic composition. I have mapped their templates. I know what they're composed of. But these are not things I want to work with, because the Orion genetics suck out life and life force and viable genetics from everything around them, because they are technically what we call soul eaters. So I'm not touching these kids. I don't want to work with these kids. And those of you who are unfortunate enough to have bred these kids, you will know what they are made of because you feel the effect of them. And as a parent to this one, I can only say that you and the kid are fueling each other because you are grown out of the same sourdough. So if you want to clear your kid, you clear yourself. And if they are not being fueled by you, then there is a hope that the genetics in them might evaporate as well. Okay, so that one is the one I'm writing off. Military projects, I have mapped it. I have seen the timelines. I have cleared the technologies. I have cleared the programs. I have released the different races from their original racial insertions into the construction so they can't return. But the humans that are part of these projects, they will have to deal with it on their own. I did that in the beginning, but I stopped that because, as I said, the Orion genetics are very, very harmful to anyone who holds genetics from the Pleiadian, the Lyran, and the Christ missions. And definitely I hold genetics from the Christ missions, and it's literally whenever I'm in contact with a human that has Orion genetics, they wipe me out. Plus, there is a lot of AI technology connected to these types of genetics, and whenever I'm in contact with it, whatever AI is behind, and that's the Orion shitty AI, always comes in, and then I'm in 3-day total nightmare where I fight these AI cubes as they try to get as much energy and genetics from me as they can. So sorry about that, guys. Can't help you. Been there, done that. I need to focus on what is important, and that's the construction and the transition, and figure out how to do this. And who will then be eligible for the transition? The military projects can, but you have a hell of a lot of work in front of you, and we can hope that as a new grand cycle goes in and clears out, that you will be wiped at that point, and then whatever's behind will be able to peek through. That is my hope. There is also another possibility that some of the future Orion races from the white Orions that turned into other parallel system will return, and they can work with the Orion genetics even though it's inverted because they are from the same lineages, they are the same strains, so they will be able to work that genetic without being harmed by it. And I've seen a lot of white Orions within the human race that were here for that purpose, but all of them have been taken out and been turned into something else, including enslavement and all sorts of weird stuff. So they have been taken out and prevented from doing what they were supposed to do with the Orion genetics. Because what the only way a mission can work is if you have something that has gone whack. The only way it can be repaired is by something similar that is not whacked. Let's just put it that way. So that is for the white Orions that are here. And some of you who have been listening to my teachings, you know I have literally told you are a white Orion. You are actually here to battle the humans that hold the dark Orion genetics. But your knowledge base has been crippled, so you don't have the technology to do so. And to be honest, I would love that our world in a couple of years that will come will change so much that I would actually be able to hold seminars or webinars where I could teach these things so people could remember what they were supposed to do in their missions. Because there's a lot of people out there who are actually here to try and assist our solar system in rebooting and reawakening and cleaning up and doing the transition, but you have all been taken out. And that is both due to the fact that most of you did not know what you were going into because of false information, but also because where you come from, what is going on down here is unprecedented. The combinations of exploitation, enslavement, and incarceration in this system is beyond. Normally, you have exploitation alone. that goes within good old rule sets. You can still follow the rules, and you can make agreements, and you hold holographic meetings between the races, and you find solutions. It's all about trade anyway, so it's just a matter of the price that is given, technology, a piece of technology or something, and then you can free whatever race is there, and you can go home in your craft, and then that's done. The enslavement is more difficult because that's under the negative alien agenda, and they are using their enslaved races to sustain themselves. So they are not really, they don't want to trade. They don't give shit about trading because they're overlords and superior and whatever, looking beyond the fact that they are sustaining themselves on other life forms. Aside from that one, they're totally superior. They're building up all sorts of lies to make that happen for themselves. And they are a really skewed out version of the technocrats. So they don't give shit. So typically with the benevolent races and whatever systems that are under the enslavement, they are typically beyond barriers, and we don't interfere with them. We don't typically interfere with the enslavers. And yes, I have put it as if the enslavers are after the timeline event, but there were also races that were already on the brink of that one before the timeline event. You can say the timeline event just made things worse. It was already in the making, and in the prior cycles, there were examples of it as well. And I have memories from some of the first enslavers, and they scared the shit out of me. Man, just put it that way. So they are typically sealed off and put into a kind of wall between the systems. So we did not interfere with these, because enslavers, aside from their whole mindset, which is screwed up after the timeline event, they also became soul suckers or genetic suckers or soul eaters and draining us dry. So no, thank you. And then there are the incarceration type of things that are going on here, and that mainly came in as a curse, as a kind of punishment that goes. Actually, Inanna was probably the one that invented that one, because she was all about punishment and she used magic, and at some point she got tired of that one, turning things into animals or whatever, and she needed a more sophisticated tool, and I think she was the one that actually created the incarceration body, which is the blueprint of the current form we have today, which is made in ways that literally makes it almost impossible for it to vibrate up, no matter how much the heart field works in the correct way and the brain field unfolds its true knowledge, the organic form will work against it. So that is some of the issues we are up against, and that is, from my perspective, why the mission fails. And this is also why when we talk about why would I specialize in the missions in the construction and not as much within the humans? Well, first and foremost, because I have knowledge of the incarceration came later. That's part of this one. But the exploitation and enslavement, I already knew that. And to be honest, I don't. The enslavers, they scared the shit out of me. No, thank you. And the exploiters, oh, they're just stupid, shitty races. Seriously, I can't. It's beneath me. Sorry, I know I sound like some kind of elitist or superior or whatever, but they are literally too stupid for me. So therefore, not really my thing. No. So in the missions, I would focus on the construction, and then I would leave the love and lighters, the will and love, the ones that felt that was their specialty, to deal with that, to deal with the ones under the exploitation contracts and the enslavement. The enslavement typically goes with different types of sealing offs as well as inserted symbols. Okay. So what would the teachers teach the enslaved and the exploited? That would be the path of redemption. Now, those of you who look up redemption, you know that word from Christianity, and it actually means to buy loose, to buy free. means to free something. Emancipation is also a freeing, but the emancipation in many ways actually goes as a follow from the incarceration, because emancipation is also setting free, but it's the transmutation process. You have to get rid of your racial contracts with the exploitation and the second seeding after the timeline event, freeing you from the regressed races and undoing the lies and the trickery and the manipulation, which goes with contracts, which goes with a specific set of rules you have to follow, specific programs you have to complete to get your contract freed. The enslavement is more difficult, and the male population, as I said, on our planet, most of them are under enslavement. We can call it contracts, but their energy system is enslaved by other races that goes with, as I said, the inverted or the overlords or the Dracos or whatever, because they don't like females, by the way. So that's the exploitation races are more with the life force and the creation of organic forms and clones and stupidities and producing genetics and all these kind of things, because if you can produce eggs that can create a life form, you can also produce genetics on a higher level. Whereas the enslavement is more been put on males on this planet, and that holds a high level of magic. It holds a high level of different technologies that are difficult. It makes men workers. And that's also that kind of worker mentality is the same as the ones we find in the original enslavers, that enslaves humans, typically humans and humanoids, in their systems as workers in their mines. And you said, well, they're mining gold. I don't know, mining different kinds of dimensional metals. I don't know. I just have a vision of these kind of enslavement arrangements. And these are dissimilar to the enslavement arrangements under the Orions, because that was something else. And then the incarceration, which in essence is mainly based upon what you would understand as magic. Simple insertions that are making the DNA code sequences run in a specific way, run in specific frequencies, that makes it repel, revert, and twist things into different versions of the laws, because they never knew the laws. Anyways, that's a whole other story. But when we work the exploitation and the enslavement, which were part of the original before the last fall of our system, it's all about redemption. And it's about releasing and redemption. So when you work with the exploitation contracts and the racial contracts, which are the same, I talk about them in the whole philosophy, it's an understanding of releasing yourself. And that is done, as I said, through a series of programs which you normally would play your way through, and there would be a certain level of honor in it. Right now, it's very twisted and thwarted because of the AI overtake of the last 4 years. So these programs have now been turned into horror movies, and they are literally like a maze you will never, ever get out of. So I'm not recommending playing that one right now. But after the emplacement is done and the new grand cycle has moved its way through the middle phase that we are in, my hope is that you will be able to undo the original racial contracts, and that is why I have put them in the whole philosophy. When we talk about the enslavement, that is going through redemption. And redemption is first buying yourself loose, so to speak. So if you have something to trade with, you can trade your way into freedom. But technically, they will always trick you, so I cannot recommend that one. So going through the enslavement, first and foremost, definitely getting rid of the cobra. The cobra is always plays a part of the enslavement. It always goes with an attachment of an archon. It always goes with the link up to the Dracos, the shitty ones. And it always goes with everything that will prevent you from getting your freedom and have any form of free will. And this is where the problem comes in, because I'm not a man. I know a lot about exploitation because I'm a female. I know portions of the enslavement because I've been working with males and I have been doing template readings. And at some point, I was lucky enough to have a good friend I was working with, which was a male, and his grace arranged for a transfer of his energy system into mine so I could see what was going on there and then to transfer it back again. But there was a short period of time where I had his energy system inside of mine so I could work with what was there. That was not a good combination, so it was transferred back. But that also gave me insight to some of the things. But we need males. You know what? I'll keep a break here.